I'm your host, Steel Carrier. I'm a customer advocate here at Qordoba, and I'm very happy to say that today we have our co-founder and head of product, May Habib, here to talk about strings intelligence. Thank you, May, and take it away.
Thanks, Steel. Hi, everybody. Good morning. All right, let's talk about our agenda today. We are super excited that we have so many awesome product content strategists on the phone, probably the most number of product content strategists who have ever been on a phone at the same time. We definitely understand that this is a newer role on a lot of product development teams, and are really excited for the discussion among this community today. So we're going to start with the importance of strings inside of software, why these words matter, and then really go into the broken process of a lot of teams when it comes to iteration and optimization of product content. We'll follow that up with how the Qordoba product really addresses a lot of that broken process, and then what customers are doing with strings intelligence today. And then we'll follow that up with an open conversation. Really excited to hear everybody's feedback on this. So the importance of strings, our big thesis at Qordoba and what drives product development is really around the upscaling of user experience in software. And just like great design has become table stakes for all of the products that we build, great copy is becoming table stakes as well. And the ability for a company's brand and personality to really make it through the copy and the micro copy that exists in software is becoming something that everyone is striving for, especially some of the companies that are on this webinar today. We know from data that changing copy in our products really matters. When people change copy, whether it's product or marketing, the uplift on conversion tends to be 4x, changing absolutely anything else from design to colors, etc. Yet, it is really difficult to do so, and we'll talk about why that is. Forrester did a really interesting study published a couple weeks ago. Adobe's CEO on stage talked about this. The companies that focus on user experience see better metrics across every part of their business. And here we're really talking about digital user experience. From brand awareness to revenue growth to the value, lifetime value of these customers. When you invest in user experience, the payoffs are really clear. And for the folks on this webinar and for UX and content strategists in product, words certainly are the user experience, and we all believe that. These are screenshots from the Marriott application, mobile application. Marriott is a fantastic Qordoba customer, and we'll talk a little bit about how they're using the product. And they care a lot about content strategy, and it has really helped them compete in a hospitality market that is becoming quite intense. So why is the process broken? Why, even though we all know strings are really important, the words in the product experience make or break that experience, why is it so hard to really get everything from tone to brand to terminology and consistency under control? The problem here is that this is content that lives inside of software. And because it lives inside of software, managing it becomes really complex. You don't have a single source of truth. What does that mean? It means that even inside a single application on a single platform, the words in that application can be coming from a lot of different places. We'll talk a little bit in a bit around microservices and the need increasingly on product dev teams to build for multiple OSs, etc. But even in a single application, where the content comes from can definitely be complex. We were on the phone this week with a prospect that for a single application has 70 GitHub repositories. So talk about no single source of truth. There's a lot of complexity here. The other point in product content is that the developer is the bottleneck. Now, there may be PMs on the phone who can do PRs out of GitHub and manually change copy directly, but especially in the enterprise and especially on bigger teams, that just isn't possible. The developer is still the person who is there in the back end and in the application files, and is the person actually coming up with that value and getting it in there. Super hard for copywriters, designers, and PMs to control that content directly. And when you layer in user feedback post-release, it's really something that becomes quite difficult. It right now is very slow and error-prone to update UX. So not only are PMs and product content strategists really removed from the process, but engineers themselves need to come up with not only that value, but the key for that value. So very manual and error-prone, really all around, and excited to hear about some of the feedback and the conversations and that comes out of the questions on what folks are seeing and really doing to respond to some of these challenges inside their product development teams. The third thing that's difficult here is scaling. And what we mean by scaling is everything from scaling across platforms, scaling across personas, scaling across new markets. And the challenges of being consistent for all of the various platforms that folks are building for is something that we hear over and over in our customer base and in PMs that we talk to. Even within a single organization, there can easily be, especially in a B2C company, 9 different engineering teams. What do we mean here? Let's take Postmates as a great example. They're a great Qordoba customer. They not only have an iOS and Android and a web application, but they actually have 3 different flavors of their product. The user and end user consumer product, so folks who are using Postmates to order something from a restaurant. There is the merchant product, which is basically the software that restaurants run on tablets to be able to manage all of the orders that come in through Postmates. And then there's the application that couriers use to understand where their next job is coming from and where they got to go next. So the complexity of managing that lexicon, the terminology, the verbiage in a consistent way across all of those applications and the multiple repositories that feed each one of those applications is quite challenging. And that increasingly is a lot of product development teams, not just folks who are in the enterprise or hundreds of engineers. The process is definitely broken when, according to results of a survey that we're doing another webinar on, so you guys will get information about this, that more than half of the copy that actually makes it into your end applications was written by engineers. And that's sobering because that's not what we want them to be spending time on. And some folks on this call and folks that we talk to will spend a lot of time and energy building brand guidelines and style guidelines that end up in a PDF that those engineers are not opening up when they are drafting error messages or new copy. And as sophisticated as some of the design work can be before a sprint or at the beginning of the sprint, not every state of a new user journey is mocked up, which means a lot of lorem ipsum and a lot of states of a product or a new feature that don't get mocked up at all, where the engineers are really creating the key and creating the copy. So what we think is the future here of UX is the abandonment of copy doc or the spreadsheet-driven approach to creating product copy in favor of a centralized way where PMs, designers, copywriters can get content that they need into the engineers in a way that the engineers feel is native to how they're building their products and is time-saving on both ends. Really improving the product development lifecycle and improving the user experience without extending sprint development cycles. That's definitely what we don't want to be doing. And how do we do this? What is the Qordoba Strings Intelligence platform, and how do we fix some of the broken process that exists in product content today? There are 3 things that really differentiate the platform that we think is compelling here and that our customers are getting a lot of value out of. The first is being able to provide a single view, a single source of truth for all of the strings that are live across the applications you care about. What does this mean? It means by key and by value, really being able to see everything that exists across those 70 repos or whatever it may be. Having custom workflows, really to be able to collaborate with design and UX on what that copy should be. Being able to search across all of the repos and make changes all at once. And we'll talk a little bit later about how having the single source of truth really makes it much easier to personalize and create custom experiences for different product audiences via Qordoba. The workflows here are quite important as well. What we've noticed is complexity that comes from not knowing what version of a value of a string is final. Needing to go from design pre-sprint to production at the end of the sprint, and seeing that key go from lorem ipsum to draft to finalized. That's something that folks tend to get under control using Qordoba workflows, something that used to be a pretty chaotic process. On the intelligence side, being able to provide data that helps people improve the product content that's going inside of their applications. What do we mean by this? We mean some pretty table stakes things to begin with. Style, grammar, spelling. You'd be shocked at how many times people can spell their own name wrong. There are 2 T's in Marriott. That is quite difficult sometimes. Being able to really enforce and provide to copywriters what a style should be is something that customers have really benefited from. And we think especially in bigger organizations where there is just a lot of copy sitting in a lot of different places is quite valuable. We do something else that is that's pretty interesting, emotion, tone, and brand analysis on this product copy. Is the readability level at where you want it to be, or something's getting a little bit too complex? Is the informality where you want it to be? Do you sound open as a brand? This is definitely emerging, and the folks who are using this right now are certainly early adopters, but we definitely think being able to map that PDF style guide to a persona-driven style guide that can be applied to content directly to make improvements and write more persuasive, more effective copy is where the best product development teams are going. A very important part of this is the integrations with developers, because if you're not connected to the dev stack, you can iterate as much as you want and nothing actually goes live. And we know that to really get content into that sprint, it absolutely cannot slow down engineers. And so what we've built is integrations to the most popular tools that engineers use so that the strings that you're creating in Qordoba or the strings that are being created by engineers are synced really at the code level via IDE plugins or other integrations that allow this two-way content to really flow and be available for engineers at build time. What does this mean exactly? Right now, this is what most customers are doing at Qordoba. They are writing source code in a GitHub or wherever it is that they work on code. They're building their app regularly via CI/CD tool. At the build, they're calling Qordoba. It's essentially serving as a microservice for text. So strings that PMs created at that time, strings that they updated, strings that engineers added, they get synced at that time. And what it means is the ability to really have direct access to the content inside of your applications in a way that gets shipped regularly. And that's having a really big impact on the quality of that user experience. We'll talk a little bit more about the case studies in just a second. So what are some of the use cases for a strings management tool or strings intelligence platform? We've definitely seen fantastic uptake on using Qordoba for brand adherence. Do I sound how I want to sound across 70 repos? Are there glaring errors that absolutely need to be fixed right now? Are my error messages very confusing? We've seen a lot of customers talk about the fact that they now have more authors than ever before touching copy, whether that's because they're working with third parties, whether that's because engineers are writing a lot of the content. More authors means more inconsistency, especially for things that are canonical to how your product works. It's absolutely important to get that under control. The other big use case that we're seeing is segmentation. We'll talk a little bit about how Marriott is doing this. But in the marketing world, we've been segmenting and personalizing for decades. People have, especially in enterprise, B2C databases of millions of rows, and they use that customer data to really personalize email and web marketing. In product, we've only ever had one build equals one experience, and that's something that a tool like Qordoba can really help PMs change. Whether it's because there are different use cases within your own product, or whether it's because there are different demographics of people who are using your own product, whether it's different markets, the ability to segment really improves user engagement and grows top line. Localization is a huge use case. For most product development teams today, the first time they've heard of something called a key is when somebody says, please add a language. And we really think that abstraction of text really needs to happen earlier in the process, so that localization is not such a bottleneck when the business really requires it. Being able to manage strings in a coherent way, and the engineers not needing to be the bottleneck for new strings creation. So being able to use Qordoba to create strings that natively flow into the developer cycle is something that is a very big use case and definitely speeds up content inside of product development teams. The content quality, and this is kind of the sister use case to brand adherence. Are we using punctuation right? Are there too many emoji? Are we using too many exclamation marks, not enough exclamation marks? The content quality piece is quite big. And we've talked about consistency across applications. Are we talking about the same things in the same way across Android, iOS, and web, and across different flavors of our application? These are absolutely very important use cases and help improve user experience overall. I want to talk a little bit about what Marriott has been able to do on product personalization. Marriott went through a very big merger not too long ago, and the result has been two very dedicated and large groups of consumers who are legacy Starwood Loyalty Club members and legacy Marriott Loyalty Club members, making each of those groups really feel like this mobile experience is for them was very important to the product development team. And they've since gone to really win awards for the quality of that experience. Since then, they've been personalizing even further. People who travel for work versus people who travel for pleasure, people who stay at the Ritz versus people who stay at the Courtyard Inn. So the possibilities are really endless. On the marketing side, there are dozens and dozens of personas. Product is really catching up. But this is very new for product development teams everywhere, but the effectiveness is certainly there and very clear to the product team that's investing in this. So what are other customers doing with the platform? Once you can control what strings actually live inside of your product, you as the PM or the content strategist can really play around with what content you want, when, and where. And so we've seen folks play with levels of informality in their product, being able to write copy based on demographics, younger users versus older users, based on behavior, new users versus people who are longtime aficionados or advocates of the product already. So once the engineer is not the bottleneck, we've really seen an explosion of just how much iteration and variation can happen at the product content level. We've seen segmentation happen cross-app and within a application, and this can all be managed via Qordoba based on where you say you want a string to go back to. From a emotion and content AI perspective, we've seen early use cases that are really interesting around people setting different brand guidelines by persona. What does this mean? It means saying that to this group of people, I want to sound different than this group of people, and really using Qordoba style guides to set that level of emotion, brand, and tone, and getting content scored against it. What's really powerful about Qordoba's content scoring is that changes that you make in Qordoba can go live in your application at the next build. This is all custom workflows, and so you can decide what levels of approvals are needed when you write different variations of copy. But once you are there, being able to author in Qordoba and have that flow right to the next build in a native way is really compelling. Again, these are questions that come up sometimes. This is not an SDK that runtime in your app is switching content on your users. This is happening via resource files that your engineers deploy natively for the frameworks that they are on. We've had some terrific customers use Qordoba and really expand use cases here, and we can definitely get into some of those use cases in the Q&A. The ability for us to really help product development teams, whether on the engineering side, the UX side, or the product side. Within different companies, the onus of copy falls on different teams, but the overall structure of product development is really where we have the most impact. Marketing teams tend to use Qordoba as well. At both Marriott and Visa, folks on marketing give input and do make modifications, but it's really the product team that owns the content that goes live in their applications. We are enterprise ready for some of the public companies that are on the phone. We are SOC 2 certified and have single sign-on capabilities with all of the major platforms. There are rules and permissions and custom role groups, auditing and history, and all of the good things that some of the enterprise folks on the phone need in a solution that manages strings. From an ecosystem perspective, we plug into all of the major tools that your developers are going to want us to plug into, and so we can definitely answer questions about that once we get into the Q&A very shortly here. So with that, I am going to send it back to Steele. We definitely want to have a discussion with the folks on the team who are on the phone. So we'll open it up to Q&A now.
So I'm going to be in the Q&A tab here, answering questions as they come up. So feel free to submit any questions if you have them there. So I'm just going to go ahead and begin. First question here is, where are the strings stored? Is there a database with an API?
It's a good question. So the way Qordoba works is your keys are actually stored by your developers in the exact same way they were doing it before. So if you were previously using a YAML file or a JSON file, Qordoba is storing them in that exact same format, and it's going to parse that file in the exact same way you guys were doing it before. But essentially what we're doing is giving non-technical people read-write access to that file in real time. Let me know if that answered the question.
Yeah. Another one here, does Qordoba actually replace the strings in the source code with keys?
We manage the key and the value in that strings file. So if you have that part of, and let me know if I understood the question right. If you already have string value pairs that are coded in your application, Qordoba follows the exact same syntax there, and nothing changes. It makes it easy. We make it easier for your engineers to follow those protocols that they've set already by using the autocomplete at the IDE level. If your content is hard-coded, when there is a pre-step to using Qordoba, we've got an extract product. It's a one-time use where basically all of the content that has been hard-coded gets keyed up, and then we make it easy for engineers to proceed with the key.
Okay. Another one here about A/B testing. They ask, can we do automatic A/B testing and get analytics from results? And how does Qordoba measure those results?
Cool. So we integrate with a Mixpanel or a Google 360 for that kind of testing. And so what folks are doing is really importing, for example, personas and segments that they've set up in an Adobe Target, using that segmentation to really write the kind of coherent end-to-end different product experience for those different personas, and then testing the performance in a tool like a Google 360. So we don't replace an A/B experimentation tool. Qordoba is not meant for experimentation. It's really meant for what we believe is something that moves the needle a little bit more in product content, which is really the A to Z rewrite for a persona that really customizes an entire product experience.
Cool. Another question here. How do you make a change to something across different apps, pulling from different repos?
Cool. So it is a very, very fancy feature called search and replace all. So being able to see all of the keys across various repos, it's really strong search capabilities, and you're able to search and replace in that way. And depending on what step in the workflow you're doing that, really have that go live in the repo.
Another one asking about our localization clients. Could you talk more about how our clients are using Qordoba for localization?
Yeah, so it really depends on where the product is in the life cycle. For customers who are really still iterating and trying to gain market share in a core market, they're not using Qordoba for localization. For some of the bigger enterprise customers, certainly localization is a really big use case because they by default have to be in 20 markets. And so their personas are a little bit more, their personalization is a little bit more complex.
Another question about scoped strings. We have scoped strings in our application. Does Qordoba work well with this? For instance, a notification may have the key, notifications.results.accept.
Yep, totally. So that is a string that Qordoba would pick up. And this is actually how I use our own product. I love our engineers very much. I used to be a former journalist, so I'm a little bit of a stickler for grammar and punctuation. So I actually, you gave the example of notifications. I like to look periodically for just the word notifications because our search works across both the key and the value, and look at all the notifications that have been written recently, all of the error messages that have been written recently, and do rewrites as needed.
Question about content scoring. Can you only use content scoring for words in the UI, or can you use it for other things like documentation?
Yeah, so the content scoring feature and set of features right now work on just files that are simply uploaded to Qordoba. So we certainly have people who upload things like markdown files or even things like Word documents. We really believe that the power here is in being able to make changes that go live in the next build, but certainly that is a use case that is possible.
Cool. A question relating to designers. Could Qordoba allow content designers to edit copy and push it to production without having an engineer code it? For their specific use case, they're asking about a content writer notices a typo, but the team doesn't have time to fix it. Can the content designers push this change?
Absolutely. That's exactly the use case here. So without having an engineer to code it, you get to build the key in Qordoba. And so when you add a new segment in Qordoba, you give the key and the value, and that goes live to the engineers. Now, they're still going to have to reference it in source code, but the string and the final version of that copy is already there by the time that they need to reference it.
Cool. Question about an integration. How does Qordoba integrate with taxonomy management?
Yep. So there is something called a style guide, and then something called a term base. And term bases can be by persona, and they can be canonical, so at the organization level. And so for things like interface, things like main verbiage, so in a product like a Postmates, the word delivery and courier are there. Those all live in Qordoba term bases. And you can tag them, you can have explanations for them, and that's the kind of content that gets flagged for automated QA and gets penalized if you haven't used it correctly.
How can you see what keys are where in the UI? Is there a way to see the changes in the product before you want them to go live?
Very good question. So in Qordoba, no, but inside of your builds, yes. And this is what is really fantastic about having this be very close to your development process. So having Qordoba being part of a dev build means that at that next build, you're able to see the content that you've written in Qordoba right in the web app or the mobile app that you are building.
Question about creating multiple personas for applications. They ask, how can I know what persona I need to create for my mobile or web application?
Very good question. So what we see happen most often is customers importing their audience from a Google 360 or an Optimizely or an audience manager. But you certainly can set up a persona on your own within settings that allows you to make the changes you want to make in your strings for a new persona, independent of any other tool that's telling you how to segment.
Okay. Just a quick question here about how we integrate with Sketch.
Yep, it's a great question. So we do have a Sketch plugin that integrates with Qordoba. We rip out all the text layers that exist inside of a Sketch page, and those go to a Qordoba project that you've synced to. In the plugin, you can select which project you want it to go to. And that's a great way for people to basically bridge that abyss that tends to happen between design and engineering. Now, it's not an automated flow right into engineers. It really depends on the custom workflow that you've set up. But what we've seen people do is rip content out of Sketch, finish the job in Qordoba. So sometimes there's still bar hips in there, sometimes things have changed. The image of that page goes to Qordoba as well, so you don't need to have the Sketch file to be able to see what it looks like inside of Qordoba. But then you can continue to add keys there, revise that content in the keys, and then that gets pushed to engineering.
A question here about the tone of copy. They ask for us to provide some more information about how our feature works of managing tone of copy in Qordoba.
Yeah, it's a good question. So let me actually go back to this page on tone. The expressed character as identified by a number of characteristics. Readability is a big one. Informality is another, and openness is a third. That's really the main things that we measure when it comes to tone. We're adding things like youthfulness or analytical capabilities, but those are things that come out of the tone analysis.
Great. Looks like that is it for questions here. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to support them now. Looks like someone asks, one more quick question here. How does translation come into play here? Does Qordoba maintain translated content?
Yep. When you are adding languages to an application, we treat that like another persona. And so those resource files being managed for you between Qordoba and your dev environment is a core part of how the product works. And so people setting up a flow where first they create and finalize their English language content, and then add languages after that that also go live in that build, in that same build. Those are definitely great use cases.
Great. That looks like it is it for questions. If you guys have any questions or anything that we didn't get to cover today, feel free to reach out to us. hello@Qordoba. You can reach us at. And if anything else comes up, feel free to reach out. Thank you all for joining today. Really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you, May, for hosting.
Thanks, Steele. Thanks, everybody.